So with free agency, we talked about how this is going to be different for the Cleveland Browns. Another thing that's going to be very different for the Cleveland Browns is going to be this draft this year. Not only are they drafting in a much different position for their own pick to be. I know we've traded for picks that have been back in the 20s before, but this is our own pick back in the 20s. It's going to be a wildly different place for the Cleveland Browns to be at. And to talk about that, we're going to have our specialist on here, Jake Burns from the OBR. Jake, how you doing today, man?
I'm great. Let's talk some draft, man.
It's an interesting year to talk draft. First, I just want to know, what are your thoughts overall about this draft class? It seems to be one of the weirdest ones just because of the circumstance in which you have to evaluate this draft class.
Yeah, it's a circumstantial draft, like you said. It's weird. It's viewed through a microscope of almost 2-year-old film. It's viewed through we don't get to see these guys actually test a ton. It is going to be a unique lead up to the draft that we haven't seen before, and that's going to be tough for fans. It's going to be tough for front offices, let alone fans knowing where your team is going to go. It's going to be a challenge overall. How we as evaluators are going to have to pull data is going to be unique. It's going to be strange. Obviously, we all know it's quarterback heavy. A ton of quarterbacks will be selected in this thing. Some positions are very slim that the Browns need, so how they handle those positions leading up to the draft will tell us a lot about what their intentions will be at 26 and beyond. But, there's some really good talent at the top of this draft and some positions that have some nice depth. But there's also some very thin spots, abnormally thin spots in the draft, too. So, it's going to be of complete interest to us because we have to wait a while to see where the Browns decide to go. And we have to wait a while to figure out just in general of what they might pick at that spot, too. So, and two, you got to think this is only the second draft we've seen this front office go after things. We might think, oh, they're going to take this position because they did X, Y, and Z in free agency. Then it gets there and they look at positional value and take somebody none of us expected. So it could be a complete wild card type of night.
Yeah, one of the things I talked about with just what the philosophy for Andrew Berry might be with this draft is if you look at the young players who played this year a ton of snaps. It wasn't where the Browns had needs going into the draft last year, right? You didn't really see Jordan Elliott played some snaps, but he didn't really play like a major role. But you saw a lot of Harrison Bryant out there, a lot of Donovan Peoples-Jones. Now, of course, due to some injury, Harrison Bryant just kind of played his way onto the field early into the year. But those weren't areas at all when you talk about tight end and wide receiver where we're like, oh, the Browns have a need here to draft a guy there. I mean, Donovan Peoples-Jones might have been the last pick the Browns had all that draft. But those are the guys who came out to play, and that's where the Browns just kind of went best player available. Do you think that this is more of a best player available type draft than trying to focus in on need? And also, let me know your thoughts on the defensive portion of this draft, because I just don't have a high opinion on this draft defensively at all.
Well, I think they're going to best player available, and I don't think they want to force it at pick 26 because when you start looking at the positions you might need and the place at which you're picking, it gets really dicey when you're looking at that. I wouldn't even be surprised if the Browns trade down a little bit because they want to accumulate as many lottery tickets in this draft as possible. And there's really no difference between picking 26 and 33, 34. Ultimately, if you can pick up a couple nice picks that you can use later in the draft to get guys that can help your team. So that is something I think that will be very much on the table. Defensively, defensive tackle, very thin. Defensive end, mediocre. Linebacker, thin. Corner, some nice players at corner. But you start to really guess about some of them because of time missed and opt-outs and safety. Safety's the deepest of the group, but you're right about what you said earlier. Not a great defensive draft because you don't see a ton of those dominating defensive tackles. There are some defensive end prospects to be had, not at the top of the draft, more middle round guys that I think are more of interest. And the same with corner. There are a lot of guys at the top of the corner class that people like, but once you hit the middle rounds, it starts to become a little dicey. So it's weird, man. It's not as strong a defensive draft. It definitely tilts offense between the strength at tackle, wide receiver, and quarterback, places the Browns probably won't spend a ton of time looking at. That's where the strength of this draft lies. So the Browns are going to have to be creative with how they go about getting some of these defensive pieces that they need to fill out this roster.
And I think there's also some logistical maneuvering that the Browns need to have here because they have 9 picks this year. And I just don't see 9 roster spots being open for young guys off this roster. I mean, like, this is a completely new problem for Browns fans, right? We have a contending team. There might not be 9 spots available, let alone being able to use all of those picks. So what do the Browns do there? Is it almost a guarantee they have to bundle some of these picks and trade back into different drafts, or try to do that just so logistically they're not spending draft picks on players that they're not even sure if they even like them they can keep?
Yeah, it's a great point. They're not going to, and like we've talked about, they're not going to start a bunch of rookies either. They know they're not in position to do that because they're fitting a bunch of guys under the cap, and they have a nice window of opportunity to challenge right now. And you don't see very many teams challenge for Super Bowls playing a majority of rookies. You can play some, but you can't play a majority of rookies on either side of the ball in terms of kind of bulk roster spots. So they're going to have to be creative. Do they take some of those picks and trade them for players that are currently fringe veterans? A guy we talked about your last show, Marshawn Lattimore. Do they get creative with some of those extra picks and couple them and take a veteran player from somebody before their rookie deal expires? Something like that. It's possible. Certainly possible, positions of need. But you mentioned a great point, too. They could couple some of these picks and maybe move back into the next draft because they're going to have to re-sign guys. They're going to have to re-sign Bake, Denzel, some of these others, and that means you have to have a fresh cycle of rookies coming in that can make an impact for you. And they're going to spend some money, too, in free agency, which could become even a tighter roster situation. So we'll keep our eye on that. But I don't think you're off on saying they can't take 9 rookies into this year. I don't think they will either. Probably closer to 7 is the number that we'll see. We'll see whether the 7 comes from giving up picks that turn into actual veterans of competence, or if that means they're moving back into another draft to take a shot there. So yeah, a lot of compelling stuff there. But I don't think they're going to play 9 guys either that are rookies.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting there. Who do you think should be on the Browns' radar at 26? Do you have any players that you're targeting that you're excited about at 26 for this team?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's defensive end prospects that are of interest. Azeez Ojori, the kid out of defensive end out of Georgia, is a fascinating player. Gregory Rousseau, a defensive end out of Miami, fascinating player if he's available at that spot. Some people have mentioned Christian Barrymore, defensive tackle, as a kid from Alabama who had a nice little stretch there. Trevon Moehrig, safety from TCU, is of interest to me. I think he's a good player. Andrew Cisco is a safety from Syracuse, is a good player. And another player is a corner. I think it's pronounced Ifeadi Melamfamu, whose brother was a high-ranking athlete for Dallas when he came out into the league. Didn't quite pan out, but he had a nice season for Syracuse as well. So those are all guys. And listen, this is going to evolve. There could be some wide receivers that they really like that slip down to that position because that's a position of value moving forward. They're going to continue to restructure that spot. But I certainly think they're going to look edge. They're going to look corner. They're going to look safety. And then if they do look at anything offensively, it would be a wide receiver of some kind. Maybe Jalen Waddle slides all the way down. He doesn't get selected in the first portion of the draft, and he's of interest to them as far as that burning type of wide receiver they would like. Just somebody to keep your eye on. So it's going to be fascinating. But I feel pretty confident saying those positions are where they're going to look if they sit at 26 and select a player.
Is there any player that fits a need for the Browns so urgently that you would think that the Browns would be willing to trade up?
That's a good question. I think there's the kid out of Notre Dame, Julian Okwara, who's a very interesting prospect. He's a hybrid player, can play a little bit of linebacker, but he's more a safety, a slot, box, alley running type of guy. He was, if you watch film, you catch film, he's number 6 for Notre Dame, a really, really good player. If he is kind of hovering there and they fall in love with him during the process, maybe. A couple guys I mentioned there, Azeez out of Georgia and then Gregory Rousseau, are both nice defensive end prospects. If they think one of those guys is worth moving up for, they could move up there. But, man, when you get to pick 26 in the draft, it's tough to see them, especially the way this front office thinks. It's tough to see them moving up at that spot to give up assets to go get a player. But if they do, those are guys that they could certainly be compelled to look at.
Yeah, and when you bring up wide receiver, I think there's something interesting to note here. And I think it kind of gets lost in the whole, because it gets crazy with the Odell stuff, right? Where people's like, oh, is Baker better with him? Is he not? I don't want to litigate that argument. But what I will say is that Baker has put together 2 of his best seasons with not amazing wide receiving help, right? Not like the top class kind of stuff that you would expect, when people describe Baker as like a game manager type. to have around him. Like he had Donovan Peoples-Jones this year. He did a lot of it with Brashard Perriman in his rookie year. And I think Baker has showed that I don't think he needs to have the most expensive wide receiving core around him. Whether he's better or not better with Odell, I don't know what the answer to that is. We'll find out this season more than likely. But to that question, do you think how he performed this year without his top wide receiver changes the math with Andrew Berry when it comes to the future of this wide receiving core? Does he see it being less valuable because he saw Baker be able to perform arguably at a top 10 level with guys that probably aren't going to be as expensive? I mean, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Rashard Higgins were two of his main targets all season.
Yeah, well, I'm going to answer that because it's a great question. Before I do so, I have to correct myself just a minute ago. Talking about Notre Dame's Jeremiah Owusu-Karmoa, that was my bad. I completely butchered it. Talking about Okoro, I'm looking at defensive ends the other day, so, man, I butchered that. But anyway, yes, back to Odell. That's an interesting situation. I don't know. I've had people, I've talked to Jake Trotter at ESPN about this. I've had this question on my mind too, man. Like, do they think he brought up a really great point. Now that Baker is a fully confident, you saw this different form of Baker as a fully confident leader, understander of this offense, able to kind of do different things, not just play action stuff, but able to sit and empty, able to manipulate defenses, able to be an very effective rhythm thrower. Is he now in a position where he's more confident, comfortable in this offense, comfortable with those around him, that he can handle a wide receiver like Odell? Because that's a great question. When you don't feel comfortable in this offense in terms of what you're doing in general, then you start thinking to yourself, oh yeah, and I need to feed this dynamic number 13 to my left. It can just raise some issues. But if you're comfortable, you're confident, you know what you're doing, you know the verbiage, you know the reads, then you can start to freelance a little bit and become comfortable. And I think that's what Josh Allen started to do with Stephon Diggs. He was so comfortable in Brian Dable's offense for a third year that he was very comfortable finding ways to get creative and get the football to Diggs. So can Baker do that now with a little bit of the freelance stuff that Odell can do sometimes? Maybe. That ultimately is inside information that only they know. I don't know what they feel. I do know that I would prefer to see them run it back one more year with Jarvis and Odell and give them a real opportunity in a comfortable scheme 2 years into it with a quarterback who's feeling better to see if there's something really there. And I think it kind of makes sense for them financially to do so. But they might feel like, hey, we can move Odell. We can get some sort of pick back, maybe second, third round pick back, and draft his replacement. And there's something there that Baker can find rhythm with those guys the same way you found it with Rashard Higgins and Kadero Hodge, and he's just able to. Baker is he's a precise. A guy is where he's supposed to be at the right time type of quarterback. I need him to be there because I'm going to get him the football in that position based on what the defense is doing. They might think that we don't need that type of wide receiver anymore who's going to do things his way every now and again. Not that that's wrong necessarily, but just some quarterbacks and some offenses are equipped to handle it and some aren't. So that is the single most fascinating question of the offseason, what they do at wide receiver, especially with 13. I have been asked it several times. I've also asked it several times, and I don't have a great answer. I don't know. It is going – if they keep him, and I think some of the quotes they've given leading up to this time currently where we're at tell us they're going to keep them, there's a belief that they can figure it out. If they don't, then it was probably decided a long time ago that this wasn't going to work out, and they've just been trying to find the right and opportune time to make it work financially and the return for the right player. So, yeah, it's compelling there. But the good thing is, like you mentioned, there are plenty of wide receivers in this draft, should they feel the need to select a few, that can be of value at certain points in certain points in the draft.
Yeah, with Odell, it's going to be an interesting situation. I think they have until the trade deadline to figure out what they're going to do with him, just because you're probably going to get the most out of him at that point. I don't know if you're going to get a lot of value out of him in the offseason. I mean, in free agency this year, especially since, this draft isn't loaded in areas that you need it to be loaded in. It wouldn't make sense to give up Odell for assets this year when you don't even know if you could use those assets to help this team this year. This is my thoughts on it, but it's going to be interesting, right? The good thing is that we know Baker can work without Odell, and you would assume that would get better with him. And I do think there's a lot to say about his confidence in the offense. Him and Odell, both the years they've been here, have been in two completely different offenses both those years, so that has to have an effect. And also, I think there's somewhat, and I don't like to do mental things a lot, but I think there is somewhat of a factor in there when it comes to Odell and Baker, where Odell's coming in there thinking, hey, I'm helping out this guy become better at quarterback. Oh, and Baker's probably thinking, oh, he's here to help me be a better quarterback. But those things aren't really collaborating. You know what I mean? Like, I think it takes one of them saying, okay, this isn't my show anymore. And for Odell, he's always been a top receiver. Even when he was in New York, he was somebody it was the Odell show on offense. Maybe he decides, all right, it's less about what I do and what I produce and more about just the offense and running it. And I think if Odell runs his offense, and is on time with these routes, which he doesn't have a problem with, he improvises, but he's a great route runner. Then, that could be scary, him running some of those crossing routes.
You're right. It's an offense that's not wide receiver based. Like, if you talk about Stephon Diggs and how he felt about the offense last year, like, it was no secret that Stephon was frustrated in Stefanski's offense because Stephon wanted it to revolve around him. And listen, there's nothing wrong with that. There are plenty of wide receiver ones in the history of this, and there will be plenty of the future who will just want the offense to revolve around them because they have the belief that when I get the football, good things happen. That's fine. But this offense is built around 11 guys, and I think there's a level of cohesion that happened. And I think that, listen, I like Odell. I think he cares more than people understand. He's a better team player than he's painted. But I think it's a frustrating system for him based on how he's played traditionally. And I don't think it's a coincidence that things started to click for them cohesively as an offense when he left. Now, is Odell humble? Does he see they went to the divisional round without me? Maybe I need to fit in instead of trying to fit out. Is there that element to it? Because if he does, and if he buys in, and if he buys into the blocking, then buys into the elements that come off of that and play action and his opportunities wherein he's running those crossing routes like you mentioned, he's running those drags, and the Browns changed the offense by the last half of the year that it was very wide receiver based. They were running a ton of gun stuff, and they were running straight drops. They were letting these guys get downfield. Can Odell swallow the pride a little bit and just try to fit in? Because I think if he does try to fit in, he's going to have a great year. I really do, if he buys into the system that's in front of him. But if he wants to throw the ball 45 times a game, like, that's not going to pan out, man. That's just not going to be who they are.
Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of a similar story. I mean, like, one of the things that went under the radar was Jarvis Landry with his production throughout the year. I think at the beginning of the season, he was injured, and it just wasn't working at that same level that we have seen Jarvis. But by the end of the season, he was back to being Jarvis Landry and really taking advantage of this offense and really being in the right spots. I think at the beginning of the year, injury or not, there was still a lot of miscommunication and disconnects between him and Baker. That's kind of unusual. But at the end of the season, it was clicking with Jarvis. It was clicking with these guys. I think the same thing can happen with Odell. I think once he gets used to this, once he understands, okay, this is my role, this is what I'm going to do, I think all of this stuff's going to come after that. But we'll see, and it's going to be a humbling position for him to be in too. His first ACL injury. He's not like a spring chicken anymore. He's young, relatively speaking, but like, he's not young for an NFL wide receiver, especially one who relies on his athleticism a lot. So this is going to be kind of a little bit of an era change for him this offseason. So I know we started talking about the draft. Now we're at the wide receivers for the team right now, what the Browns are going to do in that situation. But I think we've covered everything with the draft. I mean, it's kind of a weird year for the Browns when it comes to this draft because it's like it's not really filled with players that they're going to be able to use. They have a ton of picks, but they also don't have a ton of room for these guys. And it's going to be interesting to see how they attack it. But I don't know what
it's always a good one. It's always a good one to revisit right up until the draft too, because like as we sit here, we don't know what they're going to fill. We don't know who they're going to bring back. A, we don't know B, who they're going to sign. Once they sign, once they fill or let guys walk, we have a great feel leading up to the draft what they're going to do. But like you mentioned, and this is the best point that anyone can talk about predicting this stuff right now, is we have not seen the Browns pick this late in the draft since 2008 when they were in the 20s. We just haven't seen it. We haven't seen it for a long time. So it's a mind frame change for fans and analysts about what the Browns are going to do. And there's more mystery than ever.
Yeah, and even in 2008, I don't even think they had that pick. I think they gave it up to Dallas or somebody that year because that was a Brady Quinn one, right? Yeah, so even then, the Browns haven't really used their own pick there. We'll see if they use their own pick here at 26. But It's going to be interesting. We're not used to waiting for 25 different dominoes to fall for the Browns to make their choice in the first round. So we'll see what happens here. It's going to be an interesting one. Weird one for the draft to be in Cleveland as well, right? So it's just all kind of weird stuff happening with this draft. But again, Jake, thank you for coming on. Let them know where to find you at, man.
Yeah, you can find me at the OBR. We are obviously website based, the Orange and Brown Report, and then multiple different places. We have an OBR YouTube channel, and then we have 2 Twitter accounts, mine at Jake_Burns18, and then also have my film breakdown at the OBR Film BDN as a Twitter account where we have clips up as well. And always a pleasure of mine to join, Quincy. Thanks for having me, man.
Hey, no problem, Jake. Again, guys, links will be in the description. Check them out. Subscribe to their YouTube channel and also subscribe to their website. But again, thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night. All right.